Thanks everyone for joining. Good evening, welcome. Thank you for joining us for what we're hoping is going to be an informative and fun dive into a couple of really cool retail design projects. If you're here, it can only be because you have a love of retail design and you're likely aware of or may already be a member of the Retail Design Institute. However, if you're not aware of the mission of our institute, let me take a brief moment to tell you a bit about it. RDI was founded 60 years ago in 1961 to promote the advancement and collaborative practice of creating compelling retail environments. RDI promotes education, career building, and networking amongst an amazing community of like-minded retail designers and with the entire retail community at large. RDI is a chapter-based organization. There's many chapters all over the place representing cities and regions, and those include all kinds of places like New York, Chicago, St. Louis, Charlotte, Atlanta, Minneapolis, St. Paul, New England, Ohio, Southern California, Northern California, and the Pacific Northwest. There's also international chapters in Sao Paulo, Brazil, and Hong Kong, and our chapter here in Toronto, which represents Eastern Canada, if not all of Canada. Part of our mandate is to identify, curate, and host interesting and informative events like this one, plus many other events such as our annual Design Awards program, of which there's an event coming up just in a couple of weeks. So with that said, if you happen to be working on an interesting project, maybe you're conducting industry consumer research that maybe includes some daring new design or a retail innovation, and you feel you have a story that you think is worth telling, please let us know. We'd love to work with you and put another event together for everyone's benefit and for RDI. One day, of course, very soon, we're all hoping and looking forward to when we can attend events in person together again, where we can tour amazing spaces, learn, develop, and mingle with our fellow retail design community. So if you're not a member, please consider becoming one, and you can find out more information and sign up at retaildesigninstitute.org. You can also check the RDI events page on the website for other events coming up. Some of them are hosted by other chapters. They're online events. Some of them are online events like this one that you can participate in. They're all really great. A little bit of housekeeping before we begin. Tonight's presentation should take about 30 minutes. At the end, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So please feel free to use the Zoom Q&A feature to ask those questions. Don't use the chat, it's better in the Q&A. We will gather the questions and ask them to our presenters on your behalf in the order in which they're received. So now it's time to get this event rolling. We're very happy to welcome our two presenters tonight who are going to take us on a journey to discover how Coach is celebrating their legacy of craftsmanship by launching the Coach Reloved pop-up in New York. They're also going to show us their first ever concept store known as Tomorrow's Vintage in Singapore. The presenters are going to demonstrate how Coach is honoring their timeless style throughout their 80 years in business, and they're also their commitment to restoring, repurposing, and reimagining. So I'm very happy to introduce you to our speakers tonight. First, we welcome Giovanni Zaccariello, who is inspired by the creative world of visual experience and since a young age. He was born in Italy, graduated from Oxford with an honors master's degree in business and branding. He's traveled the world, residing in the UK, next Holland, then in Hong Kong, where he lived for 4 years. And then in 2014, Giovanni relocated to New York to lead Coach's global visual merchandising team, where he is now the Senior Vice President of Global Visual Experience. And he leads Coach's visual merchandising 3D creative studio, which oversees show windows, showrooms, and pop-ups, as well as branded events and the digital experience team. He brings over 20 years of experience in the fashion industry where he's been revolutionizing consumer experiences. Welcome. Joining Giovanni tonight is Rachel Harding, who is a designer and creative leader working in the field of scenography and set design for some of the world's biggest fashion houses. Rachel holds a BA in architecture from Cambridge University and an MA in architecture from the Royal College of Art. She's also been a visiting lecturer at both the Royal College of Art and the London College of Fashion. She has a background in architecture and furniture design and began her career working for 5 years as a concept designer for a Dutch design agency, Droog. Next, she spent some time working in the London-based scenography agency Story Studio, and then went on to work for many years at the Parisian luxury fashion house of Louis Vuitton. While there, she created show windows, pop-ups, and many brand experiences. Now at Coach in New York City, Rachel is a creative lead for pop-up design for the brand. Thank you for being here, and welcome, Giovanni and Rachel. Please take it away.
Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Jeff, for hosting us tonight. Hopefully this will be a quite interactive session. So good evening, everybody. I think today we wanted to take you through a Tomorrow's Vintage project that we kind of launched this year at Coach. But before we do that, kind of wanted to really talk a little bit about some macro trends that we've kind of seen. So I always start things with a quote. I love a quote. I think it kind of sets the stage for things to come. Especially after COVID, there's been a lot of chatting around physical, digital, but what are we really going to end up doing, after COVID? So this quote really resonated to me and my team at Coach, and kind of wanted to read it out loud for everybody. So it's no longer about physical first or digital first, it's people first, actually. So the consumer at the heart of the experience. Community, belonging, and entertainment will be at the heart of retail. So the customers are really changing, and I think we have been following a lot of quotes from the Future Collective. So we must understand the values of the community and provide spaces that will evolve and adapt to an ever-changing world. Innovation and evolution are the only ways forward. I think it's kind of like gone are the days where you can copy and paste things around the world, but also keep doing the same thing over and over again. We know how much faster the consumer are evolving, especially during COVID. Everybody has learned how to go online and how to master social media. So what we wanted to talk about first, before we go into the vintage project, is really highlighting some key macro trends that we have identified, really as a group. They've kind of shaped the vintage concept, but also projects to come. The first one is this idea of localization. So, and Rachel will talk a lot about this as she will present the Singapore experience, is this idea of actually going where the customers are. Of course, brick and mortar stores are incredibly important. Of course, our mall spaces are very important, but we have some customers that don't shop in malls. So the idea is to actually start going to where the customers are. And we have seen a lot of luxury brands already entering this space already. And then there was this idea that we all thought globally that for September was about welcoming the customers back into our stores. Of course, some regions are still closed because of COVID. But was this idea of really adding a layer of entertainment, community, and hospitality to everything that we do. This means that, our stores, in the idea of the future, is that they're not just places where you actually shop. Because now you can shop online, right? Everybody has learned how to buy a handbag on .com. So what is the value of going to a store? And I think customers are expecting more. And I think while there is not a formula that fits everybody, I do think this is the time that, it's for all of us that really are in the retail space and work in the creative industry to really think about what's next. And of course, I will not be able to wrap up this page without talking about Omni. Digital has definitely become a much larger piece of the experience. However, this does not take over the physical space, but will kind of makes it better. So how do we connect the physical world with the digital world? I think is definitely something that even in the vintage experience, we've kind of taken into account. And we'll take you through some of those. But I know everybody's eager to hear about the vintage experience, which I know Rachel will talk a little bit about concept, and then we'll dive into both the New York, the Singapore, but also the Korea pop-up, which is about to happen in a few days. So Rachel, all yours.
Okay, so yes, this project's kind of taken up my life for the past few months. So I'm going to walk you all through a little bit of the initial thinking and how the project started. And then kind of how it snowballed, really. We kind of started it in one region, and then more and more regions kind of wanted to pick it up, and they kind of localized it and they made it special to them. But I do think where this project really did start was sustainability. As we all know, this is extremely important for every fashion brand at the moment. But recently, Coach has really been making its first steps into this world. So a little kind of readout of our kind of stance on this. So we're committed to environmental responsibility, rethinking and reducing the impact of our industry and business have on people, communities, and the planet. We see responsibility as optimism in practice, something we explore by designing, learning, doing, and doing again. So I think that last statement is quite important for us when we talk about sustainability at Coach. You know, we're not really viewing this as something we've created that's going to be 100% sustainable and 100% perfect, but we'd rather have a go, and we'd rather kind of experiment and see what we can do. And I think that's really kind of the starting point for this project. Another really important starting point was this idea of Coach Reloved. So this idea is actually brand wide. It goes much beyond kind of what we're doing in visual experience, and it's really something that's happening for the entire Coach brand. And really it's about taking a sustainable approach, but doing it in a very Coach way. So really leaning into heritage and really leaning to this idea that sustainability can be fun and playful as well. So I'm just going to play a video which kind of introduces this concept. So the idea of Coach Reloved is about many things really, but you know, I think it's also about thinking about Coach bags in terms of their past, present, and future. So it's really about taking old bags, reinventing them, cleaning them, repairing them. But it's also about thinking about the fact that when you buy a Coach bag, you're buying something to last for a very long time because it's crafted to last. So it's this idea that you might buy a Coach bag, but that you might then pass it on to your daughter or your granddaughter. And this is something that's very core to Coach as well. Obviously, Coach is a heritage New York brand, and we're very, very tied up with this idea of vintage. You know, the Brooklyn flea market is absolutely full of vintage Coach saddlebags, and all these kind of trendy girls are buying them now. So really, it's about that connection between past, present, and future, vintage, and also the product we're selling now. So Coach bags are meant to be worn, loved, and eventually passed down. We would like to create a store that celebrates Coach vintage, past, present, and future. Today's Coach is tomorrow's vintage. So there's three pillars behind Reloved, and obviously it's quite in depth here, but I'll just kind of skim over them. So it's really these three pillars of the first idea being that Coach bags are crafted to last, they're made to last for a long time. Therefore, there's a lot of vintage bags around now that are Coach. This idea of future vintage. So our bags actually get better with age. We're not thinking about disposable purchasing anymore. We're really thinking about this idea of a bag and its longevity. And then also this idea of Coach cares. So Coach has been doing this for a long time. We have a lot of kind of craft workshops where you can kind of repair your leather with all these kind of moisturizing lotions and really learn how to change your bag and kind of give it a new lease of life. So a couple more videos, just looking a little bit more at Coach Reloved.
I know icons never go out of style. That's why my bag is a Coach vintage piece. Lovingly reconditioned by the craftspeople at Coach. I know it'll just get better with age, and it's better for the planet too. Coach Reloved. Wear it, love it, pass it on.
Coach bags are like you. Beautiful, timeless, unforgettable. And like you, they deserve to feel gorgeous. Coach Upcrafted bags are pre-loved, but you can't tell, can you? With a little care and imagination, they've been transformed by our craftspeople. And you know what else? They're good for the planet too. Coach Reloved. Wear it, love it, pass it on.
So yeah, I kind of really love these retro videos that were created for the concept. I think they really kind of lean into this idea of our vintage heritage. But there's also a lot of reinvention going on as well. And I think you'll see that when we present the pop-ups. It's this idea of taking new things and kind of twisting them and changing them to make something new. And when it comes to the product, there was some really interesting product created for this collection. We worked with a local craft workshop in New Jersey, and they really took old Coach product and then reinvented them completely. So my favorite one is actually this one in the center that kind of has these notes and kind of almost draftsman patterns that have been added to the bag. But at Coach, we're really interested in this idea of combining old and new to kind of create something special. But I guess before we move into the concept, Gio, I don't know if you have anything to add on kind of Coach and vintage and Reloved in general.
Yeah, I think, for people that are lovers of Coach, I think everybody wants vintage to come back every single time. I think maybe this is the by far the time that we have celebrated it the most, really, at Coach. And somehow both the product and the pop-up have got the same kind of idea, creative idea, whether it's the product being remade and restored for the new generation. But also I think when you see where the pop-up kind of came from, it's kind of like the same idea where we really wanted to look at found object, but also like found facade, which, you see on this page that Rachel is showing here, with the notion of kind of creating less waste, whether it was through renting the furniture, but also, like working with local artists and maybe give them space to do this. So every single person in New York has this dream about finding a real bargain of a Coach bag in a vintage store. So the idea was to really recreate that vintage store, that thrift store that usually sometimes is in the Lower East Side or in Brooklyn, and really those cool places. How do we globalize that, and how do we give that experience to every single girl or guy around the world? So how do we make it accessible to everybody? So the first thing that we did was actually work to find the right product, right? Vintage product is kind of scarce. So every single bag is actually one of a kind. So I know that, one of the pages that Rachel showed, there was 3 bags. There's only one of each. And I think somehow that's really what the customer wants. And believe it or not, some of those Coach Reloved bags sold out within minutes, especially online. So somehow scarcity it's kind of a good thing. And I think that was the entire really premise behind the Tomorrow's Vintage store, which, Rachel is about to share with you. So, but I think that even just the image here on this page kind of shows a little bit what you're about to see and experience.
Yeah, so I think talking a little more about the concepts, we really had this idea that we wanted to kind of create a sustainable pop-up, but we wanted to do it in a very Coach way. And the way we did that was really leaning into this idea of New York vintage heritage. So we kind of had this dream that everyone around the globe could kind of have that experience of entering a New York vintage store, but with a local twist. So I'll just read the concept. Welcome to Tomorrow's Vintage Store, a place for Coach vintage past, present and future. A store that looks backwards and forwards, celebrating Coach's greatest hits. We invite customers to experience an authentic NYC vintage store, wherever they may be. And I think that, like, a small point, but an important point, was we launched this in October with our full collection, but we also launched it when Coach turned 80 years old. So it's a real time for us of sort of looking at the past, but also thinking about our future and where we're headed as a brand. So I think a couple of kind of strategic points. I think the last year and a half has been a very turbulent time for all of us who work in retail design. And I think everyone on this call can definitely identify it's been a time of great change, and also a time to kind of rethink what we're doing and try to think really what our strategy will be moving forward, as well as we kind of move out of COVID. And for us, we were seeing several things that we really wanted to do within visual experience. So the first one is, and I think we'll talk about this a lot, was a shift to local. So as many of you will know, you know, shopping habits have really changed, and there's been a real shift to local shopping and kind of supporting local businesses and shopping closer to where you live. So we were really interested in this idea, and we were kind of thinking, wouldn't it be magical or exciting to kind of take over local spaces or spaces that had a meaning to people who live within a certain city, and to kind of animate them as a kind of vintage store. The second point was we really wanted to actually reinvigorate our existing Coach stores. So those, some of the things you'll see will be takeovers of exciting local spaces. Our New York version of Tomorrow's Vintage happened within our Coach flagship store in New York. So another question we were kind of asking ourselves was, you know, obviously store traffic is down. How can we kind of reinvigorate our stores, but in an authentic way that really connects with our customer? And I think the third point, which I know I've kind of mentioned quite a few times now, but is the idea of heritage storytelling, which is just so central to Coach. And our story with Bonnie Cashin, our kind of first ever designer, is something that we always want to resonate really strongly with our customers. So how can we tell that story in a really immersive way that gets the customer really involved and in the moment, and really thinking about that kind of heritage and that moment where Coach was invented in the 1940s. So a couple of more practical points, you know, and as Gia was kind of mentioning, we really wanted to kind of try and make this pop-up as sustainable as possible, given the product we were selling. So we've done lots of strategies within the space. So one thing we've done is we've reused a lot of vintage furniture. And in many cases, we've kind of reinvented it. In some cases, we've hired the furniture. So no kind of materials have been used or wasted. We've really kind of taken things from vintage furniture shops and then given them back. We've used a lot of recycled materials in the space. Any new materials we have used, we've sourced them locally. We haven't been shipping them across the globe, which has meant actually that the pop-ups have looked quite different in different regions, but actually that's been one of the really interesting things about this project. I think as a brand and as retail designers, we're always super kind of focused on global consistency and making things feel the same in every country. But when you think about sustainability, you know, do we need to do that? Or is it more interesting to actually source our materials locally and have things kind of have a local flavor? And we also thought about end of life. So all the materials in this pop-up were recycled or reused or returned. And that was a really important point as well. Gio, I don't know if you have any further thoughts as well.
No, I think for me, this could be the beginning of something big. I think, of course, we have used it for this concept. I do think based on the success and the reaction, especially in Singapore and New York and Korea to come, this could definitely shape the future about how we do things in general. So again, as Rachel was mentioning, during COVID, I think we've started to rethink about things, and it's really about taking the learnings from what we have learned during COVID and somehow pushing them into the future with us. So as much as this experience is about vintage and tomorrow's vintage, I think there is a lot that we can take with us for projects to come in the next few seasons. Yeah, and those are just some of the images to what Rachel was showing. You can see how, you know, some of the elements are still there, whether they're rented or, but then we've added some recycled materials, so whether it's foam, or whether it's about collaborating with local artists. And I think that's also what has made each of those experiences very different and very bespoke and kind of speaks to the local community. And I think we do have some slides that kind of highlight some of the designers, especially in Singapore and New York as well. In terms of some of the experiences, and again, I'm sure most of you guys have seen some of those around the world. Of course, Coach Reloved is really what Coach has been standing for. And I know Rachel spoke a lot about these. We did launch some workshops around our fleet about 6 years ago, and now I think this is definitely the next layer on. But one of the other programs that we have relaunched in North America is Coach Take Back. So we're inviting customers to return their pre-loved Coach to our stores, and they can either give a new life to their bag to make them a Coach Reloved bag. So of course we have craftsmanship bar in our stores, or they've also been able to get a voucher and actually buy a new bag. And then with all of the returns, this is how the Coach Reloved then comes into place, which is a beautiful black bag that It's one of Rachel's favorite, but you can see how the two programs somehow are quite connected. And they've both been incredibly successful. The other three programs, which I'm sure if you've followed Coach, you've seen them over the past few years, starting with the left is Coach Cares. As you guys know, a Coach bag is made to last for life. So we actually are developing, and actually we're launching even a leather spa program in China tomorrow, where you can actually learn how to clean your bag, how to moisturize your bag so that it can stay, it can stay with you forever. And you can pass it on from generation to generation. Coach Create, which has been a very successful program for us, where you are able to customize customers bag, whether it's with patches, studs, rivets. There's an entire program that we update every season. And then last but not least, one of the most successful program is bringing in local artists that can actually customize your one-of-a-kind bags. And I know we have some interesting options coming up for Singapore that we'll take you through over the next few slides. But we do believe that the artist is kind of also was helping localize some of those experiences. What the press reacted the most is actually about the archives. So we were able to actually ship for the very first time some bespoke archival bags from New York City to Singapore. And it was love at first sight. We had to put them behind glass. Everybody wanted to purchase those bags. Of course, they're not for sale. They're one of a kind. But it was a very, very interesting moment for people to learn about the Coach history, the heritage and crafts, and how we keep taking inspiration from the past to build Coach of the future, really. And then to complete everything, we also partner with a music company based in New York, actually, called Big Crown Record. And Rachel, I'm sure you're so passionate about this one. You can take the team through what it is. And I'm very happy that now this is rolling out in other locations too.
Yeah, so I think a really important part of this project, as we've kind of been saying, was local collaborations. And one thing that we did in every single pop-up, which was really lovely, is we collaborated with Big Crown Records. They're a small record label based in Brooklyn. And they sign a lot of new artists, but they also restore a lot of old vinyl. So basically we created a special playlist curated with Big Crown of specialist vintage records, and these vintage songs were played, in New York, they were played in Singapore, they'll be played in Korea as well when we open the pop-up next month. And we also had vinyl on sale within the pop-up, so you had kind of genuine New York vintage vinyl that you could kind of purchase on site along with your Coach bags. And I think this is something that in visual experience at Coach we're doing a lot as well. We're really moving beyond the idea of a space that's just to sell product. It's really a space for experience, and it's a space where you might buy more than a bag. You might buy a record, or you might buy a specialist vintage t-shirt, and it's kind of all part of the experience and all part of brand building, and that's very important to us. As Gio mentioned, we collaborated with local designers in every region. Partly we kind of were renting furniture from these designers, and partly we were commissioning pieces, but every single one of our designers had a sustainability focus. So for New York, we worked with Kim Markle. Kim Markle's based in the Hudson Valley. She has her own artist studio up there in a kind of beautiful setting by the lake. But she also kind of hand makes these furniture pieces from recycled resins and recycled packaging. And they're kind of really interesting because they're kind of like ghosts of, they look, I mean, this is my interpretation, but they feel like ghosts of vintage furniture pieces, but kind of made in a new material. So her work would just really resonated with what we were doing with Tomorrow's Vintage. We work with Shaw Rugs, who are native New Yorkers based in the UK. But they actually manufactured some rubber rugs for us out of discarded rubber tubing. For Korea, which is our pop-up, which has not yet happened, so this is really a special sneak peek, but we're going to work with Woo Jae Lee, who is a Korean artist, and he makes furniture actually out of recycled newspaper pieces. They're quite beautiful, so we're loaning some pieces from him. And we're also going to work with Fict Studio. Studio is run by a lady who actually takes discarded pieces of marble and then kind of reuses the marble to kind of make new furniture pieces. So I think, yeah, I think we were super excited about this idea of collaborating with local artists for Tomorrow's Vintage, because we'd never really done that before as a brand, and I think it was something that was very successful about the project. So now I guess we've kind of teased you for long enough. We've talked about this project a lot. So we will actually now show you what happened with the project. So just some early sketches really, but I think it's lovely to kind of show. These were done by Han, our in-house designer. She's a beautiful drawer. And it's really interesting perhaps to just show a little bit behind our process and our thinking. So we really started off with this kind of rough sketching process. We were trying to kind of think about how can we combine all of these elements, you know, and it was quite eclectic. So how do you combine this idea of reusing an old vintage facade, bringing in recycled materials, but also using vintage furniture pieces as well? You know, how could that come together as a design? And we kind of became obsessed with this idea of the facade. Our creative director, Stuart Bevers, really loved it because he thought you could imagine that you were coming to the first ever Coach store in the 1940s. Like, we actually didn't have a Coach store until a little bit later than that. So this store is kind of imaginary, but imagine if you turned up at that first ever vintage Coach store in the 1940s, what would it look like and what would it feel like? And I think it was very important to kind of keep that vintage look and feel throughout everything we were doing. Just some more concepts really. As you can see, we were thinking about this as a standalone pop-up, but also as a kind of in-store experience. And now I'm going to show you, I think, what is probably the jewel in the crown of this project at the moment, which was the activation that happened recently in Singapore. So, Gio, I think maybe you'd like to take this one. I was going to kind of talk about localization and how important this was to the project.
Yes, I love that we have done this big tease. So I'm also, you know, conscious of time. So we'll make sure that we'll go through everything and get time for questions at the end. But this is definitely the creme de la creme of what has happened today. And, you know, like, as I was mentioning before, it's in a very centrified location in Singapore, where actually all the cool kids really hang out. There's a lot of coffee shops here. So think about your Williamsburg of Singapore. That's what this place is. And again, it's very unconventional. There's no luxury brands, or actually no brand at all in this neighborhood. It's mainly restaurants and eateries. And I think the next few slides show a little bit about what it looked like on the inside. Again, we took over a landmark space in a beautiful corner. We had basically queues for the entire month. The average age of the customer was way younger than we have in our current doors. And I think it really speaks to this new generation and the love of vintage that we have around the world. And I think those photos really show everything that Rachel was talking about, whether it's the music, this idea you can actually buy vintage records in the store, this idea you can make your own bag, you can listen to music. You can also see all of the furniture was actually rented. Nothing was made from scratch. Everything that was made was actually made out of recycled foam. This is the archival project that we talked about. So those bags have never left New York City in 80 years, and here they are for the very first time. So here you see all of our Kisslog bags on top, and you see the Ergo bag at the bottom, which was also introduced in Spring Runway with Coach Forever Part 1. And this was really a moment to celebrate the brand. So within the same store, you basically are able to see the past, the present, and the future kind of side by side. Those are some of the activations. And again, we brought in some of our craftsmen that we have, you can see here. And then over the next few slides, you also see some of the artists that we're talking about. So Tiffany Lovage, for example, is an artist that we work a lot with in Southeast Asia. She's a native from Singapore. She's actually here customizing the oversized Willis, which was a huge photo moment in the region. But you can see how the space is very humble. It doesn't feel pretentious. And I really think that brings to life what Coach is all about. At the same time, I know I mentioned in my first slide this idea of omni. So the local team actually came up with this incredible idea of creating a little bit of a local game, which was basically all around customization around pins and patches. And this idea you can actually win your digital pin. So you can basically pick the card into the store and then you play the game on your phone, and then you're able to basically customize your bag with your free pin. And of course, this created a lot of buzz because whatever you win, you can actually then share on social. And we know how trendy that has become nowadays. So you can see how there's a little bit of a hint of the future here with Omni, but it still feels quite heritage and Coach. So this idea of history and craft is definitely at the heart of this. And then, as Rachel mentioned, store takeovers are as important for us. In New York City, we have our flagship store, Coach House. So instead of going big and bold with an outdoor location, we actually created the smallest vintage store in the world, which was a little bit of a dream when we started to think about this. And this shows a little bit of a schematic about where everything started. And again, most of the elements were kind of made out of found, the salvage material. So there was very minimal new development of woods. And Rachel can talk a little bit about the vision and how it came to life in the store. And again, you can see how there is a little bit of a thread between Singapore and New York, but it does feel a little bit different and bespoke.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting contrast because I think we were super excited about Singapore because we were really interested in this idea of how can a brand take over a localized space. And then this obviously was a more kind of traditional retail environment. So I think one of the key challenges was, and this is always a challenge in store, how do we kind of bring that feeling of an immersive vintage world into a Coach store when, you've always in a store got all these kind of fixtures, you've got screens, you've got point of sale, it's very hard to kind of enchant the customer really. So we love this idea of the smallest vintage store, this kind of tiny little capsule store that you could go into, lose yourself and really kind of shop Coach vintage and imagine you are in that first ever Coach store. And we had kind of, as Gio was saying, like we had this sort of found elements. So for example, those lamps were found elements. We were including kind of little vintage record players, which we hired in the space. We had lots of like nice little touches that I think really kind of brought this project to life. Here's the inside of the vintage store. So you can see all these lovely vintage bags, which were sold out within hours, which was a bit of a problem actually, but great to sell products, obviously. And we also had a kind of craft area upstairs. So in a similar way to Singapore, we really had kind of different local craftsmen coming in. We also had the Coach Take Back and Reloved program happening in store. So customers were bringing in their bags to receive credit. We have a special restorer. Her name is Debbie the restorer, and she's an expert on everything kind of Coach and restoration. And she came in and did several workshops, which were very successful. And then just quickly showing South Coast Plaza, the concept was really the same. South Coast Plaza is our LA flagship. And again, we bought the smallest vintage store in the world. A bit more of the interior space. So again, you can see the vintage furniture, you can see the craft workshop, you can see this lovely rug, which was made by one of our collaborators, Shaw Rugs. Here's some of Kim Markle's furniture in action, looking beautiful. And you can see this from the back of the space. Again, we were doing Coach Cares, so workshops on how to kind of moisturize your leather and give it a new lease of life. And Gio, I don't know if you want to talk about this will be the last project, Korea.
Yeah, so this is coming up in 2 weeks, or even before that. So based on the success of Singapore, of course, we're actually taking over a current cafe in the heart of Seoul, one of the youngest districts of the area. And again, we are bringing a beautiful concept there. This will be the biggest one that we've ever done. It's 2 floors, and It will be a 2-week-long program, and I think the next few slides show a little bit about what this could look like. So we are basically taking over the space, top to bottom. We have an arrival moment with benches outside, and then you can actually see through the window already what's coming in. You can see a little bit of an hybrid of Singapore and New York. Even the lamps are from the New York concept, for example. And again, each lamp is different because they're all found. They're not actually made from scratch. The only thing that really made are the neons. Everything else is really more locally sourced. And then as you go inside the space, each room will have a different activation. So again, based on this idea of heritage and craft, we'll have workmen's, craftsmanships, but also artists. And one of the things that I mentioned at the very beginning is this idea of layering in entertainment to everything we do. So each of those locations actually has a full calendar of events, workshop. Think about when you go to Apple for the Apple Genius Bar, or this will be the coach version of that. And I think we've seen a huge influx of young kids really wanting to understand how things are made, what things are from. So we think this is going to be a big success at launch. And then this shows other rooms. Again, you can see how everything is rented. It definitely doesn't look like our coach stores, but we kind of like this idea. And actually in these locations, we also have a partnership with a t-shirt company where they'll be doing pressing on site, which will be bespoke to this location only, for example. Records are still part of this. And then we also have the bespoke furniture here made out of recyclable newspaper there that Rachel spoke about a little bit earlier there. So it's a very immersive, very 360, and hopefully the customers in Korea will learn about the brand, will learn about Coach, and maybe they will leave with 1 or 2 bespoke bags that they will keep for life and, transform from generation to daughters and sons to come. And I think we covered all 3. We covered New York, we covered Singapore, we covered Korea. So I know we're way over time, but do want to make sure that we have time for questions. So Jeff, I don't know if you got anything already lined up for us.
A couple of things. First of all, thank you so much, Giovanni and Rachel. That was great. Well done. These stores really resonate with purpose and authenticity. I really enjoyed it. We do want to open the virtual floor up to questions, so please, again, use the Q&A feature in Zoom to ask the questions, but I'm going to kick us off with one that I kind of had as we were preparing for this event, and it's that you were selecting a location for the new Tomorrow's Vintage concept store, and there's a ton of major cities globally where luxury retail markets are huge, including, of course, your own backyard in New York. So kind of wondering, what was it about the amazing city of Singapore that led you and Coach to select it as the host city for this first store?
Yeah, I think we work a lot with our regional teams around the world, and I think we were only really taking cities or locations that made sense. Of course, we love Paris, we love New York, we love London, but those may come later. I think we want to make sure that the locations that we find really speak to the local community. And this was not just a press exercise. We really wanted to make sure that it talked to the values and the purpose of Coach and also the project itself. But I am sure that after Korea, more cities will come.
Right.
But they have to be the right ones, then they have to tailor to the new customer. And it's also about giving back. If you think about maybe that location in Singapore was going to go out of business, so we're really supporting a local business that maybe didn't have the capacity to survive after COVID. So there is a lot there about our philanthropical approach as well to those locations. So which I know we didn't touch upon, but I'm glad you asked the question. So there is definitely a filter there, but same thing with the space in Korea. As you know, most of Korea is still shut down. So hopefully this will revitalize the area and bring a new clientele into the space. So that's really how we've been selecting those locations.
That's great. We have a question from one of our participants here. It says, I'm curious why bright yellow was chosen to be the main color tone to present the concept of vintage.
Rachel, I think you can take
I can take that one. I mean, I think I always struggle with this. Like I could tell you that there was like a lot of very deep meaning behind the yellow, but I think that would be a lie. I think for us, we wanted something super that felt really fresh almost and zingy, in contrast to kind of the vintage furniture. I think that was really the reason it was chosen. Is, you know, we really wanted to avoid, when we were creating this vintage store, this idea that it would feel musty. And I think that's something we struggled with a lot at the beginning. You know, like if you do take a lot of vintage furniture and old things and place them in a room, like it could look beautiful, but it could also look like a jumble sale, you know? So I think for us, the yellow was really giving it that contemporary feel. But I would say, actually, we kind of designed this project a very long time ago and we chose the yellow. But since we've done this project, I do think yellow is very, very on trend. I'm not sure exactly why, but I do keep seeing the yellow now in many, many, many projects. So I don't know if it answers your question, but hopefully it doesn't.
Yeah, and Jeff, there is something along the lines also as well with everything we do, like we're trying to bring joy and optimism, and somehow when you see yellow, you kind of, there is this sense of like happiness. Again, that was not the reason why the yellow was chosen, because we did not sit around a table and pick a color, but it felt right for many reasons. And I think for me, this idea of joyfulness and happiness was one of the ones, and somehow it was a good contrast to the vintage furniture, which is all brown. You know, like imagine if the old space was brown, it's never going to go down in history like it's gone down in history. So there's definitely a dichotomy there of things.
Right. Yeah, perhaps some of the Canadians here in the crowd might be relating it to a chain of discount grocery stores called No Frills that has had a bright yellow and black lettering background, which is actually done a really good job of branding themselves in the recent year. So you might want to check out No Frills and see it. Another question here. I was just curious. Do you know about what the average age of the average bag is in the program? You know, like 10 years old, or more like 50 years old, or somewhere in between, or do you know?
Do you know? I think it was more of a mixture. I think maybe 50 is a little bit too old. Because hopefully those bags have already been, given to daughters or sons, really. But I would say an average of like maybe 25 years. So yeah, and of course the oldest bags are the ones that you cannot buy, which is the one that everybody wants, which are a little bit older there. But I think if you think about 70s, 80s, I think that's really more the average really era that bags were kind of coming back.
Also kind of curious, or sort of related to that question, is that does the program, have you done anything that sort of tracks the history and the life cycle of the bags that have been repaired and refurbished and reinvented? You know, there might be an interesting history background, or even a previous owner that has some kind of interesting quirky history, or celebrity or whoever. And is that at all part of the campaign to try and attract people, or is it just the bag itself and whoever owned it previously is, you know, not part of the story?
No, it's funny. We actually love the story. So on two sides. So number one, every single bag actually has a handmade hang tag where we actually write what we do with it. And I know that, you know, Rachel mentioned Debbie. So let's say if the bag needs to be cleaned, if the bag needs a new locker, needs a new zipper, everything is actually written by hand by her, because she does it one at a time. So you kind of know the condition of the bag, where we received it, and how she's actually transformed it to be new. At the same time, we also launched this on social media. So if you guys have time and you want to check out Coach Instagram, like we also shared some of the stories of some of our customers. And so all the stories that you mentioned, we're actually proud of them. And some of them are actually quite emotional. And some of those bags may have been the first bag that someone ever got. Or, you know, people have been saving for a year maybe to buy their bag for their daughter. And I think that's exactly what Coach is about. And I think we have been featuring them as part of the 80th anniversary campaign on social, which will culminate into a big program that's launching in October. But yeah, if you guys go back on social, there's a lot there that you can see. And those stories are from all around the world, not just Singapore, New York, but we have stories from Japan, from China, from Korea, from Europe, from everywhere. Yeah, I think it's a big part of our history, really.
Okay. And Marty tells me that apparently Pantone number 130647, illuminating yellow, is one of the 2 colors of the year for 2021.
Well, there you go. There you go. Love that. Thank you for the note.
We only have one other question here, which actually isn't, it's not exactly specifically related to the project and the design itself, but one of the people who's been watching, they're kind of curious about the role of what they're asking. What are some of the roles that an interior designer can go for to be working in the fashion industry? And as people in the fashion industry also dealing with store design, perhaps you can answer that question. They're kind of wondering, aside, of course, from retail or renovation design. I'm not sure if the person who asked the question can elaborate on that, but does that question make sense?
I mean, Rachel, maybe, I think with Rachel's background, I think, that kind of shows a little bit about Rachel. I think Rachel is a great example of, starting in interior, but then going into retail and how everything is really connected. Like, I think we also see a lot of, people trying to enter fashion from hospitality, because again, it's about service, right? At the end of the day, whether you're serving someone in a hotel, in a coffee shop, into a store, you're building the space for the customer. So I think the skill set is pretty transferable. And I always think about Rachel as an example, because I think, a background is so varied. And actually she started in Amsterdam and things. I don't know if you maybe want to mention that, because I think that's really more of a nod about what they're asking.
Well, I think for me, like I never imagined myself in retail design when I started out at all. It wasn't even something that I kind of knew really existed. And I designed in a lot of different places. Like I kind of designed furniture, I designed exhibitions and galleries. And I think my interest was always in how can we tell stories with spaces. And I kind of fell into retail design by accident. I started working for Story Studio and started designing all these fashion spaces, and actually realized that I really loved it and enjoyed it, because that's kind of, in my view, everything that we do is how can you tell a story with a space. And also in fashion, to be perfectly honest, like I find the budget's very exciting. Like there is more of a budget to do something exciting than, for example, a gallery show or making furniture. Like there's really a big budget because it's profitable, I think, to tell a story to a customer in an exciting way. And I think that's probably what I enjoy the most, is there's also a real need to kind of create things that are exciting and immersive. I don't know if that answers the question, but I've kind of just been talking.
Yeah, it reminds me of a talk that I saw a couple of years ago at one of the retail design events I went to, about the accidental career in retail that so many people have. And I too, my career prior to working in retail design, I was designing prisons and psychiatric hospitals for an architecture firm. And then I ended up doing retail, and here I am, 25 years later. Well, we have no other questions, and we're coming up on our hour. So unless anybody has anything else, I wanted to just conclude and thank you very, very much for giving this presentation. It was fun. It was interesting, and it's nice to see fashion retailers embracing the notion of addressing climate change and other sustainability measures. Getting people here sending notes to say thank you so much. We had sort of tossed around the idea of just opening it up to everybody who's watching, who might want to join just for a bit of a social chat if they want to. But I'm also very aware of everyone's time. Everyone's got screen fatigue, I'm sure, after all these days of working online. And perhaps they might want to also go and have their dinner or whatever, depending on what time zone they're in. But we can open it up and go from there if anybody wants to. And thank you so much again for presenting to us. I really appreciate your time and your insights. So is that, Dina, are you going to open it up here? Or is that the next step? Is Dina listening? She has control. You awake, Dina?
Well, while Dina opens up, I have a question. For this campaign of yours, is there a strategy, a timeline attached to it? How long do you want to go through? There was mention as your initial strategy, you're observing, learning, and testing as you move forward. And what have been the observations thus far?
Yeah, so far I think this has by far exceeded our expectations. I think we didn't know that Singapore pop-up was going to become such an icon for us. And one of the good news about vintage is vintage is going to be with us forever. So we really see this as more of an evergreen idea. So it can really happen at any time when we find the right partnership with whether it's a coffee shop or a local, a local community hub. But unfortunately, there is not such a big, we can just say, oh, we need 200 vintage bags and we go and find them somewhere. Like the project takes time. And I think, in the past, we have moved very quickly. So this, can also be that we only do 2 or 3 a year. And that's, I think, totally fine. I think it's about doing it right and making it relevant to the region. I think this is less about mass creating. And it's more about doing one thing at a time. And like we say in our stores, we serve one customer at a time. This is really about one project at a time, so that each project feels really unique and talks to the local community. So maybe, let's say if we do something in Paris, it will look totally different. Maybe the yellow will definitely be there, even if it will no longer be the color of the year next year. But the local activation, the local artists, the collaboration, the music, will all be different, because what speaks to people in Singapore will not speak to people in Paris, and and so forth. So I guess the answer is it's kind of a long-term piece, especially when it comes to Reloved. So you guys are definitely going to see more after Korea, I hope, and we really hope Korea is going to go as well as Singapore. So we can't wait. We're excited for that.
Great. There was one other question that popped up asking about if the recording will be available, and yeah, the answer to that is yes. It will be posted sometime in the next few days on the RDI YouTube channel, YouTube page, and you can find it there both on the international one and the Toronto chapter one. Just give us a couple of days to get the recording cleaned up and posted. So, oh, here we go. Here comes Bess. I think Dina's, yes, she's opening it up to everybody now as we hit her. You can probably stop recording too, Dina.
I just wanted to say thank you to both Giovanni and Rachel. That was really excellent. And I love so many aspects about the whole concept and the thought that went into it and all those details. I'm a personal lover of nostalgia and vintage and interactivity. And I've been saying for years now, this is going to be the way that it's going to, I mean, everything always returns, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's really important to have those moments of nostalgia when we're kind of in a not so great moment in life right now. It's kind of looking back on the good old days. So I love how you, that concept came to life. It really resonates. And I think that's why it's resonating. I think the results are.
And then we talk a lot about nostalgia. Actually, that's a very, very important word that our creative director uses all the time. And and for me, it's more important now than ever before.
Absolutely.
To your point. So, and I think that's, to be honest with you, why it's working, because I think everybody's kind of looking back and look at values and purpose and, why we exist and why we do things, and do we really need a new bag? And, like everybody has been challenged, and this kind of felt the right time. Again, it was already planned, but somehow it felt the right time to launch it. And again, the other reason why we're not doing it in every single region at the same time, it is because of COVID, and we want to make sure it's happening at the right time. And, Korea was supposed to happen at the same time as Singapore, but we delayed because of COVID to make sure that people can really enjoy in a safe space and things like that. So hopefully, I don't even know if normal exists anymore, but we'll go back one day and enjoy those things in live. Again, we have not traveled for any of these, which is unheard of. All of those installations have happened over the phone, over FaceTime, which is a whole different ball game for people that do our work, and especially all of us that are perfectionists. But yeah, it was definitely great to share this with you all.
I have a question.
Of course.
For Rachel, probably. One of my pet peeves as a retail designer is we always are too bogged and focused on the entry experience of the customer, and we kind of forget their journey leaving the store. Your cute little store-in-store concepts, the little vintage yellow stores within the stores, I'm hoping there was something happening in the rear side, because the images that we saw was just the front facing. Upon leaving, are we just seeing the yellow walls of it, or there's something happening behind there?
I think you raise a valid point. Like, I think it's maybe a flaw in the design, I think. But I think, like, we were very, very focused on that wow, you know, as we call it, like a POE moment. And I think you're right, like maybe that is kind of something in retail design that we focus on too much. I mean, one thing that we were doing was kind of had all of our craft experiences and our workshops, they're kind of upstairs in the space at Coach House. I'm not sure if you've ever been to the store, but it's kind of like this, it is quite hard to like push traffic up those stairs. So we were kind of providing a lot of like fun stickers and sort of signage, and kind of trying to get the store associates to kind of bring people up to that top space as well. Yep. I think, to be honest, like we would have loved to have extended that project within Coach House and like completely taken over the whole store and like really gone to town. But definitely, like, our budgets for North America were a lot lower than they were in Asia, which is often the case for us at Coach. So really, I think that was also a limitation, and it was also kind of about, you know, doing something small but doing it well. And I think that's something I'm really proud of with the New York store, is like, you know, it was a low budget and it was difficult to like create something spectacular, but I think almost in its smallness, that was kind of the charm. I don't know.
No, you're totally right. The side windows do give a peekaboo to the side. I'm just worried of the back wall while leaving.
Do you know what? I'm actually going to think about that when we do the next one, because I think it's a really good point.
There you go. Marty's always adding value wherever he goes. Oh, that's great. Well, I think most of the people have dropped off of the attendees now. Most of the people left are just the panelists and a few others. So maybe we'll take that as an opportunity to thank you again and sign off for the evening, and we can all get back to our other lives. Or Giovanni, you said you're in for an all-nighter, so you know, back to work.
It's gonna be fun. Yeah, it's gonna be fun, and you guys will see another very big project happening. Where it's launching tonight in Shanghai, but I think it's gonna be all over social in the next 48 hours. It's not vintage, but it's pretty remarkable, and it talks about localization. So stay tuned for more. I know most of you guys follow us on social and my social page, so which is more like a work page than a private page, because we do way too much. Like, I wake up every morning and there's just so much happening, which is amazing. You know, people think retail is dead. Retail is just about to begin. So we are back, and I think hopefully it kind of gives a sense of optimism for me, and we just need to get to a better place, you know, health-wise, but retail will never be out. So, but thank you all, and we'll keep in touch.
Yeah, and you know what? We just got one more question. Do you have time to answer that?
Oh, of course, yes.
Okay, great. So the question is, do you see this type of pop-up activation happening on a continual basis? And do you envision another series in years to come?
Absolutely. That's it. Simple. Yes.
Yes and yes and yes.
Yes and yes. Yes, yes and yes. Yeah, you're definitely gonna see this yellow for years. So we love it.